This is the story of Berend Borst, a Dutch veteran. This is his experience of the German invasion in 1940. He was stationed near the Hague. This is the second episode. Borst and his comrades have been captured before they get into action. Let's begin. After walking for some time, we saw the airport, which is located near Valkenburg. I later learned that the airport was far from ready. It was regularly sprayed to firm up the soil. Runways had not yet been constructed, but hangars were already standing. It soon became clear that we were being taken to that airport. This was my first time at an airport. I had often longed to be at an airport and to see airplanes take off and land up close. My wish was now being fulfilled, but I had never imagined it would happen this way, much less hoped for it. From a distance, we had already seen that there were aircraft on the field. As we got closer, I counted them. There were 40, all large heavy transport aircraft. It was evident that the terrain was not yet suitable for landing. All the planes had sunk into the ground, some had their landing gear broken off and were resting on their fuselages. Upon arriving at the airport, we were grouped with a number of Dutch soldiers. These two had all been captured by the Germans. There were about 250 of them. Most of them were from the airport garrison. They had had a tough morning. The boys from the airport were quartered in hangars. At the crack of dawn, the first German planes were already flying over Valkenburg and the airport. In the hangars, people were still resting when the planes dropped 3 bombs. A direct hit was scored on the last hangar and the other bombs created large craters in the airport. After this attack, the airport garrison had to fight abruptly as soon parachutists descended, almost all of them lifeless. Planes also started landing. No one came out alive from the first aircraft, but as more and more planes landed and German infantry advanced, the Dutch who had bravely resisted had to surrender. The battle overwhelmed them, we were told. We hadn't been on the airport long when there was heavy shooting in the area. We lay flat on the ground, as bullets flew over our heads. There we lay, waiting for what was to come. A German soldier approached us with a stretcher. He needed 4 boys to fetch a wounded man. 2 infantrymen, one of whom was a corporal, Hoofheestemans, and I had to follow the German. We were given the stretcher to carry and so we went on to the airfield, watched by others. It was a fearful journey. Shooting was still happening around the airfield and the whistling of bullets was still an unfamiliar sound to us, often flying past us. We walked in a stooped posture and repeatedly let ourselves fall flat. Finally, we reached the back of the airfield. There lay a wounded German, seriously hit in the lower abdomen. Through his torn clothes, we could see the large wound. It was a terrible sight. The German who had guided us indicated that we should take the wounded to the hangars. He himself went to another wounded man who could still walk somewhat. We now returned with the wounded. It was a heavy load, so we carried the stretcher on our shoulders. This was dangerous, as we could no longer duck from the flying bullets. Between the planes, which stood there like strange ominous monsters, we had already covered a short distance of the way back when we were startled by a strange wail that grew stronger and ended in a loud bang. It was a shell, fired at the Germans. This was not the first. The airport was under fire from artillery. Judging by the sound that came from the front, the artillery fire was from Katwijk aan Zee. More and more shells came howling, exploding all over the airport. It didn't get any better for us. We were in the middle of these explosions. The prisoners and Germans fled the airport as quickly as they could. Because of the wounded, we couldn't move as quickly. As fast as we could, we ran to the hangars. The wounded man indicated that we should leave the airport with him. We dared not, as we had been ordered to go to the hangars. We finally arrived there. In one of the hangars was a Dutch military doctor with some Red Cross soldiers. We had just reached the hangars when a shell exploded nearby. Now it was too much for us. We set down the wounded and fled after the others. The war had passed over the airport like a raging hurricane. The sharp whistle of the bullets was terribly nerve-wracking. Suddenly you hear the whistling and then it's over, time to seek cover there is not. That would not help much anyway, as it is impossible to determine from where the bullets come. Repeatedly we had the gruesome thought that the whistle of a bullet could be smothered in the body, then you were hit, and then? The wailing of shells was even worse to hear, from afar they were already audible. The wailing grew louder as they approached quickly. If such a projectile passed close by, you felt as if something enormous was coming at you to crush you. The dreadful wailing of a shell can be compared to the sound that a low and very fast flying plane makes, but a shell is much more penetrating, and then to realize that they end in a hard explosion that sends sharp, glowing shards flying around with tremendous force, sowing death and destruction. Shells, like trees and bullets, cannot be dodged, but the victim in the artillery fire has the advantage of hearing the shells from a great distance, whether they are coming at you or passing further by you. If a shell came dangerously at you, the best thing to do was to lie flat on the ground. While fleeing to get off the airfield, I thought for a moment about the theory I had heard the previous day about the shells. Now I experienced the practical effect of these murderous devices, which I learned faster and better than the theory. We did not worry about a far-flying shell, we had to get away from this hell of shells. We were about halfway to the hangars and the exit from the airfield when a shell came dangerously at us. At the same time, we were already lying flat on the ground. We had stayed together, the four of us, so now we were lying close together. In anxious anticipation, we waited for where the projectile would explode. It came closer and closer, the sound getting louder. Like a howling monster, it approached us, invisible. We waited. What would the end be? A deafening bang right next to me made me cringe in horror. The ground shook, then I felt sand falling on me. My head seemed to burst from the tremendous impact. Dazed, I lay there. When I finally dared to look up, I saw the other three lying next to me. Exactly between us, the shell had exploded. I got up. Thank God, I had not been hit by shrapnel. My attention was drawn to the corporal, who was screaming loudly as he crawled on the ground. One of his thighs was shattered. Through the torn pants, I saw a terrible wound. Now I also looked at the other two. They lay motionless next to the newly made hole. Hoop Heastemans was lying with his back to me, they had been killed by the murderous steel. I watched this terrible drama for a moment, everything had happened in a minimum of time, but I will never forget it. It was like a terrifying dream, I was no longer master of myself. Completely shaken, I fled from the airfield, leaving the others to their fate. What could I do for them? I was powerless in the face of such events. It had not yet dawned on me that there next to me two young men had been robbed of their lives and another lay there alone, writhing in severe pain, perhaps struggling with death. Away, away I had to go, away from the encroaching death. It is a true miracle that I was the only one who escaped unharmed from the bursting shell. But I had just left the airfield when another shell howled at me. I now quickly sought cover by a ditch. There I had barely lain down when the shell exploded in the ditch wall on the opposite side of the road. Again, I was spared in a remarkable way. Further I fled. At some distance stood a farmhouse, I ran there. I encountered many civilians who had fled to this farmhouse and were now sitting together anxiously. There were also some of the prisoners of war, whom I joined. We did not stay long, for some Germans who were also there ordered us to join the other prisoners of war, but we did not know where they had gone, we saw none in the vicinity. We left the farmhouse. Later, it was heavily hit by shells. There are many meadows around the airfield, except on the seaside, where the dunes stretch out. We walked through these meadows, many of which were covered with low grass for haymaking. At first, we walked with 5 of us, completely unobserved by the Germans. This freedom was very welcome. We already had plans to possibly escape. Therefore, we headed towards Leiden, where we expected the least Germans. But that freedom was not long granted to us, for soon a German noticed us. He indicated the direction to Valkenburg, where the other prisoners of war had probably also gone. But we did not really feel like it, though we apparently did. After walking in the direction of Valkenburg for a while, we lay down in the tall grass at a moment when we thought we were unobserved. There we lay for some time, after which we crawled in the direction of Leiden again. This had to be done cautiously, for we could be sure that the enemies did not have their eyes in their pockets. But we were out of luck, for soon there was a broad ditch. Here we had to give up our creeping, we could barely crawl through the ditch. We could have crossed over a dam a bit further on, but the Germans were dangerously close there. So, we just got up. Now we saw that not far from us were German soldiers urging Dutch soldiers to dig a hole, probably to set up a machine gun, for they had such a device with them. The Germans also saw us and they motioned us to jump over the ditch. We did so with the help of a pair of boots that one of us had on. We took turns wearing them and jumped over the ditch. Once we were all on the other side, we had to seek cover for the airfield was still under heavy fire. Where we lay was not safe, for we were only a few hundred meters from the airfield. During this very fierce attack, we watched in suspense where the projectiles exploded, fortunately none came in our direction. In Katwijk, they apparently found the right target, all the shells hit the airfield and not aimlessly. In a short time, at least 15 planes were on fire. One by one, the machines turned into a huge fireball with a tremendous black smoke cloud. This tremendous war scene made an unforgettable impression on us. It's not every day that you see a number of German planes go up in flames. After the planes had burned out, we went in the direction of Valkenburg, for it was clear that escaping was out of the question. We were soon picked up by a German, who also took some prisoners to Valkenburg. There we came to a garage. Here we met more prisoners of war, but none of my friends. I inquired where the rest of the prisoners could be, but no one knew anything about them, others were also looking for their friends. There were also many people from Valkenburg in the garage. They had to report to the Germans at certain times. The prisoners of war did not stay there long, for after a while all the Dutch soldiers were gathered and we went into Valkenburg. We were brought to the Reformed church, which stood in the middle of the village. There were also the other prisoners of war. They were lying on the small grassy area around the music pavilion, basking in the sun. Upon our arrival, we were warmly cheered. I saw my friends and I was soon spotted by them and they called out and cheered me. They had missed me and were glad that I was back safe and sound. I was no less pleased. After we had handed in our knives, we could also sit with the others. Now I had to tell my friends where I had been since I had fetched that wounded man at the airfield. They asked me where Huub Heestemans was. I had to tell them the sad fact that he had been killed. This news greatly disturbed them, which was very understandable. Only now did I fully realize what had actually happened, now that we were all healthy together, except for Huub Heestemans, who had fallen for our dear fatherland. This concludes the second part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of these first days of the war for the Netherlands? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.